my god, look at the time. It's like 3:22 already. We're supposed to have the meeting at like 3.
Yeah, so boring. Why is the boss so late?
Exactly.
Our boss is never late before. Did something happen to him?
I know, I'm so sleepy now. What are we supposed to do?
Should we call him?
Yeah, I think we should.
Okay.
Oh? Is the power out?
Yeah, the Wi-Fi is also down.
Oh no.
Uh,
Well, all of us are here already. Let us start today's meeting. You can start your presentation.
Now I'm going to present for the first question regarding the inflation in the USA. So firstly, we need to know what is the federal fund rate. So federal fund rate is the short-term interest rate that banks charge one another for loans. For example, if one bank finds itself short of reserves while another bank has excess reserves, the second bank can lend some reserves to the first bank. The loans are temporary and typically overnight. The price of the loan is the federal funds rate. Now, why has the federal funds rate been kept at a very high level in the United States? Well, there are several reasons for this. The first one is inflation concerns. The second one is the dual mandate from the Congress, as Fed needs to keep first price stable and secondly, maximize employment. The third one, Fed has been increasing interest rates since March 2022. This allows the economy to adjust to higher borrowing costs. Now, what is the discount rate? Well, discount rate is the interest rate banks pay to borrow directly from the Federal Reserve through a discount window. Borrowing reserves from another bank in the federal funds market is an alternative to borrowing reserves from the Fed. And a bank short of reserves will typically do whichever cheaper. In practice, the discount rate and federal fund rate move closely together. Well, there is this issue, like the Central Bank of Taiwan increased its discount rate to deal with inflation problem in March. Well, there are several factors for this issue. The first one is Taiwan's annual inflation rate surged to a 19-month high of 3.08% in February 2024, up from 1.8% the previous month. Second, the central bank revised its 2024 Consumer Price Index forecast upwards to 2.16%, up from the earlier prediction of 1.89%. Third, the central bank cited concerns about the impact of an unexpected electricity price hike in April on inflation as a key reason for the rate hike. Now, what is a real exchange rate? I will also show the graphical analysis. So the real exchange rate is the rate at which a person can trade for the goods and service of a country for goods and service from another country. You can count real exchange rate using the formula of nominal rate times domestic price divided by foreign price. Now, if we want to analyze the real exchange rate, I will use three different graphs. First, the market of loanable funds, the graph for net capital outflow, and the market for foreign exchange rate. In the market of loanable funds, here we have the demand and supply curve. The supply curve is based on national savings equals investment plus net export. And the demand curve is from investment plus net capital outflow. A decrease in investment could shift the demand curve to the left, which result in a lower interest rate. Second, in the graph for net capital outflow, A lower interest rate shifts the net capital outflow curve to the left. And the third one in the market for foreign currency exchange. Well, the supply curve is affected by the net capital outflow. So a shift of net capital outflow also shifts the supply curve to the left, which increase real exchange rate. The next one is about nominal exchange rate. Well, what is the nominal exchange rate? Well, the nominal exchange rate is the rate at which a person can trade a currency of one country for the currency to another country. Here, we have the downward sloping showing the negative relationship and the upward sloping curve showing a positive relationship with the value of currency and supply. There are several factors that can affect the supply and demand curve. Well, first, for the demand, interest rate. A higher interest rate will increase demand. So an increased demand will shift the demand to the right, which rises price level, which raises price of the yen per US dollars. Well, when there's a decrease in demand, it will shift the demand curve to the left, which decrease the price of yen per USD and also decrease the quantity of the US dollars. Next one is for the supply curve, where first, changes in taste. I will give an example for this. For example, if an American likes matcha, so they want to buy matcha from Japan, so they have to increase the US dollars so they can exchange it to the yen. This makes the US dollars depreciated. So when one currency depreciates, then the other currency will appreciate. Well, in this case, it's the yen will appreciate. Second is national income. So when national income rises faster, the supply curves will shift to the right in the US. Now for the question number 5. So I will show the graphical analysis and also the answers. So in Tokyo's foreign currency exchange market, well, firstly, continuous capital outflow means investors move out their capital from Japan. So they convert their yen to US dollars, which increases and shifts the demand of US dollars to the right. Also, secondly, Central Bank of Japan wanted to pull down the nominal exchange rate down. So they can do it by buying US dollars and selling the yen. Here's when they buy more dollars and then selling yens, this will decrease the demand and it will pull down to its wanted number, which is 155 yen per US dollars. That's all for my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
So this is the second part for our annual meeting. This is a problem about China and the US since they've been competing against each other about economic growth, also the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic for the last few years. First, I want to talk about the definition of trade war. So trade war is the situation that each country would try to damage each other's trade. Typically, there would be imposition of tariffs or quota restrictions. Therefore, in this case, US will be imposing a high rate of tariffs on China, which will cause a reduction in aggregate demand. First, we need to know about the components of aggregate demand. The 4 components of GDP or Y contribute to aggregate demand for the goods and service. So it would be Y equal consumption plus investment plus government spending and plus net export. Since the US will impose tariff, Chinese goods in the US will be more expensive, leading to less demand of Chinese goods. Therefore, the export of China will decline and affect the aggregate demand to decrease too. If many foreign countries left China, aggregate demand will also decrease. This happens because there is a reduction in investments, since many of foreign companies that used to have foreign direct investment in China decided to leave.
Okay, so next up, I'll be explaining the two other situations, which are a real estate crisis and a stock market crash. If a real estate crisis happened, the aggregate demand in China would decrease due to several factors. The first factor is wealth effect. Considering the wealth effect, as the prices of real estate drops, households may feel poorer, leading to the decrease in the aggregate demand. The next factor would be investments. With a real estate crisis where real estate prices have a sudden drop, investments would decrease as the market is worsening. And as investment is a component of the GDP or the aggregate demand would decrease as well. The next factor would be financial stability. Real estate may be a collateral for loans, where a drop in the of real estates may make the central bank more conservative about lending, which means tighter rules for having a loan. This would make borrowing harder, hence decreasing the aggregate demand. And lastly, employment. The unemployment rate would increase as firms might try to reduce their production costs and more. The increase of unemployment rate would mean that households' income in general would decrease, leading to a fall in spending, making the aggregate demand decrease. The next situation is the stock market crash. When a stock market crash happens, the aggregate demand in China would also decrease due to several factors. The first factor is also the wealth effect. As a stock market crash means that the prices of the stock would suddenly drop, households would feel poorer, making them spend less and hence reducing the aggregate demand. And the second factor is investments. When a stock market crash happened, it would be more expensive for people or firms to invest to a company. This may happen because when the prices of the stock decrease, the company would sell one share for less percentage of the company. This then would lead to a decrease in investments, making the aggregate demand decrease. Last but not least, the consumers. As stock market have many and diverse consumers, when a stock market crash happens, the consumers may feel less confident. This may lead to consumers or households deciding to save more instead of spending more. This would also mean that the consumers would buy less stocks, hence decreasing the aggregate demand as well. And the last factor would be financial stability. As there's a drop in investments too, there would be uncertainty in the market. This would make the central bank have tighter rules for lending money and decreasing the consumer spending, and the aggregate demand would decrease as well.
Now I'm gonna give you the analysis for China's real GDP and overall price in the short and long run. Now let's take a look at the diagram below. So the diagram below shows the short run and long run equilibrium in the intersection of the short run aggregate supply, the aggregate demand, and also the long run aggregate supply. Now I'm gonna move on to the short run. So what will happen in the short run? As I've mentioned before, so the trade war between China and USA, this shifts the aggregate demand to the left. And the shift causes the price level to decrease and is shown in P1 to P2. And it also shows the decrease of GDP of China. So the equilibrium moved from point A to point B. Now, in the long run, the economy tries to fix itself. So the short run aggregate supply will shift to the right. And we can see it, the intersection moved to point C, where it become full employment again. However, the shift of or the increase of short-run aggregate supply, this has caused the price level to decrease because it tried to adjust itself.
So now I have some suggestion that China's government can do in response to the short-run economic fluctuation caused by this black swan. So first one is fiscal stimulus. The government can implement fiscal stimulus measures such as increase government spending on infrastructure project or tax cut to stimulate domestic consumption and investment. This can help offset the negative impact of reduced foreigner investment and trade tension. And the second one is trade diversification. Actively pursue diversification of trading partners to reduce reliance on any one market, particularly amid ongoing trade tensions with the United States. Strengthening economic ties with other countries and regions can help mitigate the impact of disruptions in any single market. And the third is support for affected industry. Specifically, target support for industry hit hardest by the black swan, such as the real estate sector. This could involve measure like providing subsidies or tax breaks to real estate developer facing financial difficulties or facilitating restructuring and debt relief. And the last one is strengthening social safety nets. Enhance social safety nets to support individuals and families affected by economic downturns, including unemployment benefits and social welfare programs. This can help maintain social stability during periods of economic uncertainty. And for Central Bank of China, the first one, currency management, manage the exchange rate to ensure stability and competitiveness in international trade, particularly amidst trade tension with the United States. This might involve interventions in currency market or adjustment to reserve requirements for banks. And the second one is monetary policy adjustment. The central bank can adjust monetary policy to support economic growth, such as lowering interest rate to stimulate borrowing and investment, or providing liquidity support to banks and financial institutions facing liquidity shortage. And the last one is financial system stability. Monitor and address risks to financial stability arising from this real estate crisis and stock market volatility. This could involve implementing measures to strengthen banking regulation, enhance oversight of financial institutions, and provide support to maintain stability in financial market. That's all. So let's move on to another problem. In this problem, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the European Union adopted a number of sanctions in an attempt to immobilize the war effort. One sanction was a complete import ban on all Russian seaborne crude oil and petroleum products. The sanction sent energy prices to historic high. First, I will use a graph of energy market to explain why the sanction caused the energy price to rise sharply. As you can see in this graph, that the graph shows the intersection of the supply and demand curve for crude oil and petroleum products, with the initial equilibrium price label as P1 and the initial equilibrium quantity label as Q1. When the import ban is imposed, the supply curve will shift to the left, resulting in a new equilibrium point with a higher price label as P2 and a lower quantity label as Q2. This demonstrates how the sanction caused the energy price to rise sharply due to a decrease in supply. So how about the overall price in the European Union in the short run? So in the short run, the increase in energy price will lead to a higher production cost for business, it causing a decrease in overall output. This can be shown graphically by a leftward shift of the aggregate supply curve, and it will resulting in a new equilibrium with lower output and higher price. As a result, the rise in energy price could contribute to a decrease in output and increase in overall price in the European Union. Additionally, the decrease in output may lead to higher unemployment level as businesses reduce their workforce to cope with a higher production cost and lower demand for their products. And how about if EU authority would like to solve the inflation problem? EU authorities may consider to implementing expansionary fiscal policy. This could involve increasing government spending or reducing taxes to stimulate demand and counteract the negative effect of the energy price shock. By boosting consumer and business spending, expansionary fiscal policy can help to mitigate the inflationary pressure caused by the higher energy price. And how about to solve the recession problem? To solve recession problem, expansionary monetary policy can be implemented. This might involve lowering interest rate and implementing quantitative easing to encourage borrowing and spending. By increasing the money supply and lowering the cost of borrowing, expansionary monetary policy can help stimulate economic activity and counteract the recessionary effect of the energy price. And for the last question, could EU authority use a single policy to simultaneously solve both problems? And the answer is not really, because expansionary fiscal policy might not be sufficient to fully counteract the recession effect. Similarly, expansionary monetary policy may worsen the inflation pressure resulting from the energy price shock, and it will not balance. As we can see in this graph, that the short run aggregate supply will shift to the left, and the aggregate demand will shift to the right. And if it not balanced, if inflationary and or deflationary pressure can occur, as well as a decrease in the rate of decline. Okay, so that's it for me.
Hi everyone, my name is Olivia Deodora Santoso, and you guys can call me Olive. And today I'll be explaining problem number 4, which would cover 3 main topics, which would be liquidity trap, quantitative easing policy, as well as aggregate demand. So this is the problem itself. In the past decade, the quantitative easing policy was often used by the major economies such as USA, Japan, and EU to deal with its recession problems. These economies could no longer use conventional monetary policy to lower the short-term interest rate due to the liquidity trap in the money market. Therefore, they chose to use the quantitative easing policy to lower the longer-term interest rate. The main goal was to stimulate the economy by increasing the aggregate demand. And today I'll be covering 5 different problems or questions. The first one would be liquidity trap. The second one would be about quantitative easing policy itself. The third one would be the applications of quantitative easing policy in USA. The fourth one would be the effect of the quantitative easing policy on aggregate demand. And the last one would be quantitative easing policy in a graph. So the first question is, what is liquidity trap? Liquidity trap is a situation in the money market when the interest rate is low or near zero. Yet, consumers prefer to hold on to their cash, where the demand would then become horizontal. In other words, the interest rate is so low or almost 0%, and there's a high liquidity preference, which means consumers or households would prefer having cash as it is the most liquid asset. This would then make the demand curve perfectly elastic. This is a graph to represent the liquidity trap. The liquidity trap here can be located in the horizontal part of the demand curve, or the one I marked blue. As shown in the graph with the percent of liquidity trap, the increase of money supply won't affect anything in terms of the interest rate, as the money demand curve is already perfectly elastic. The second question would be about quantitative easing policy. So what is quantitative easing policy, you may ask? Quantitative easing policy is a non-conventional monetary policy used when the monetary policy or the usual monetary policy is ineffective, like when liquidity trap happens. The central bank, or in this case, the Federal Reserve Board or FED, then would purchase financial assets from the open market in terms to increase the money supply as well as reducing the interest rate. But how does it differ with the usual monetary policy, you may ask? So, quantitative easing policy focuses more on buying long-term securities, which also targets a long-term interest rate. It will have a lower long-term borrowing cost, which could support the financial assets price, as well as encouraging more lending and investments. While the usual monetary policy, or what we call by the conventional monetary policy, focuses more on applying the short-term adjustments, which targets liquidity and interest rate at that time or in the short run. The next question, I will be discussing about the application of quantitative easing policy in USA between the years of 2008 until 2014. So there's 3 applications of the quantitative easing policy, which the first one, or QE1, started in 2008, where FED purchased a 200 billion USD agency debt, and then a 1.25 trillion USD mortgage-backed securities, as well as a 300 billion USD long-term treasury debt, which was actually around 22% of the market. The second one, or QE2, happened in 2010, where the FED purchased a 600 billion USD of long-term treasuries at 75 billion USD per month. And the third one, or QE3, happened in 2012, where FED purchased a 40 billion USD mortgage-backed securities, in addition with a 45 billion USD long maturity treasury securities per month. And you may ask, how does quantitative easing policy increase the aggregate demand? Quantitative easing policy would increase aggregate demand as the policy itself aims to lower the longer-term interest rate and increase the money supply, which promotes borrowing money. As it promotes borrowing money, consumers or households would have more money and spend more instead of just saving it. The other factor is because of the wealth effect. Higher financial assets price, which happened because of the quantitative easing policy, would make the households or the consumers feel wealthier, making them have the ability to spend more. And the last factor would be exchange rate. As the exchange rate would decrease as the currency weakens, it will promote or increase exports, which would increase the net exports as it is one of the components of the GDP, which then would correlate and increase the aggregate demand. In the last question, I will be explaining how does quantitative easing policies shift the aggregate demand curve to the right and influencing the output and overall price of the economy. So this graph here would show how quantitative easing policy would shift the aggregate demand curve to the right and influence output and overall price of the economy. As the quantitative easing policy works, the aggregate demand of the economy would increase, which means that the aggregate demand curve would shift from AD1 to AD2 or to the right. As the short-run aggregate supply curve and the long-run aggregate supply curve stays the same, the equilibrium point would change from E1 to E2. And as the equilibrium point changes to E2, we can see that both the price level and the output would increase from P1 to P2 and Q1 to Q2. So in conclusion, the graph here shows how quantitative easing policy increases the aggregate demand, making the equilibrium point of the economy change, hence increasing the overall price and output of the economy. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you all for listening.
This is the last part of our annual meeting, which is about keeping up with the economic strategies. I have done a research from assigned issue to look deep into the strategies of the US presidents, which are Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Here is the issue. Donald Trump has his own ideas of lowering the tax and imposing high tariffs on the imported goods from China, which the US currently has a trade war with. However, Joe Biden did not follow Trump's idea. In the United States, there are mainly two big groups of people. Republican Party follow the principle of supply-side economics, whereas Democrat Party follows the principle of demand-side economics. Therefore, it did a research about these two economic strategies about their differences. Supply-side economic and demand-side economics are two distinct approaches to managing economic policy, each with its own theoretical foundations and practical implications. Supply-side economics focuses on boosting economic growth by increasing the supply of goods and services through tax cuts and deregulation, which will make population benefit from the higher amount of supply with the lower prices. It will also increase employment. However, demand-side economics, also known as Keynesian economics, focuses on boosting economic growth by increasing aggregate demand through government spending and progressive taxation. This strategy believes that lack of demand is the reason why there is an increase in unemployment, together with businesses and factories being unable to expand because they have insufficient workers. President Trump's implementation of tax cut policy aligns with the principle of supply-side economics. By lowering corporate tax rates, Trump aimed to incentivize businesses to invest more in the economy, thus stimulating production, job creation, and economic growth. In contrast, President Biden's tax increase policies are more in line with demand-side economics. By proposing tax increases on corporations and the wealthy, Biden seeks to redistribute wealth, fund social programs, and stimulate demand from lower income individuals through increased government spending. Next, we're going to talk about effects of following Trump's policy. This is the first one, which is a reduction in corporate tax to encourage domestic investment. First, we're going to see a graph of market for loanable funds. The demand curve is investment and net capital outflow. So after the corporate tax was reduced, there is more domestic investment, which shifts the demand curve to the right. After that, you see that the real interest rate will increase from R1 to R2. Next, we come to see the graph of US net capital outflow. Since the real interest rate increased from R1 to R2, there's movement along a demand curve, which is the net capital outflow. An increase in real interest rate affects in decrease of net capital outflow. Lastly, the market for foreign currency exchange. In this graph, the supply curve is a net capital outflow. From the previous graph, the NCO decreases. The supply curve will shift to the left as S2. You will be able to see that the real exchange rate increases from E1 to E2, and the trade balance will reduce. We can combine Greek graphs together like this. First, the demand curve of investment shifts to the right, which causes the real interest rate to increase. The increase of real interest rate reduced net capital outflow. Later, the NCO supply curve in the last graph shifted to the left and caused an increase in real exchange rate. This will cause trade deficit, since the products will be more expensive. This is another policy of Trump about imposition of high tariffs to reduce trade deficit. First, the demand curve, which is the net export, will shift to the right, and the real exchange rate will increase. Initially, the trade balance will increase, but later it decreases with a higher real exchange rate. But why many economists are against Trump's idea of imposing high tariff? The reason is that imposing high tariff will reduce the demand for foreign currency. As you can see in the previous graph that there is a higher real exchange rate and the dollar strengthens decrease. Thus, the tariffs reduce both import and exports. Moreover, tariffs increase the cost of imported goods, which will affect the demand of groups of people that also consume China's product. Therefore, cost of those products will increase and consumption will fall. This is all about my presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you for all of your hard work for this presentation. Well, let's see how will the economy moves in the future. I wish a pleasant afternoon for all of you. Have a nice day. Zoom is dismissed.